beautiful, warts and all. Now, not seeing others this way is why non-Christians can be so disdainful of believers. So long as they can point out that you need fixing, they can feel like everything is just fine with them. That's why the media has such a field day whenever a Christian leader is found out to have gotten into hot water, because it really allows them to feel better about themselves. Because that's what the disease of sin does. It gives us this deep need to justify ourselves at the expense of others. You know, when all heck broke out in that garden, we read that Adam blamed God and he blamed Eve. And Eve blamed the devil. Neither one of them was accountable. That's sin. It has this need to puff us up. And when that happens, it ruins relationships. Sin is saying this. Sin says, your life to enhance my life, not my life to make your life better. It says, I'm good because you're bad. I'm competent because you're incompetent. Sin is hiding from the truth about ourselves and telling lies about one another. You know, speaking of that, how many of you here last night wore a Halloween costume? Okay. I figured a few of our kids would raise their hands, but all of us should have. All of us wore a costume. You see, every last one of us hid from something, from someone. Remember in our reading, when Adam and Eve were exposed in the garden, they hid from God their nakedness. And quite frankly, sin exposes all of us in the same way. It makes us feel naked. And the natural sinful way to deal with it is to hide a bit of ourselves from others and from God. Perhaps the costume we wear is the clothing of defensiveness. Or maybe it's the dress of self-righteousness. Masking ourselves and hiding is what we do when we are confronted with the truth that our actions and our lives make us more worthy of the declaration of sinner than saint. Now we can run, but in truth we cannot hide. At least not from God. God sees everything about us that we don't want anybody else to see. He knows everything about us that we don't want anyone else to know. And just like God did catch up with Adam and Eve in that garden and confronted them, He does come and catch up with us and confront us in love by sharing with us His Word and telling us what's best. The people that we saw in that video, they didn't grasp at all what that means. They've been tricked. Like most of this country and world really has been tricked into failing to recognize the gravity of our sin. See, the American way is that we get to decide what is best and what is right and wrong, and if anyone tells us otherwise, we just start claiming our rights. But because that usually leads to us deciding what's best for us, even if it's at the expense of others, sin can bring great pain. And ultimately, it's the cause of death in this world. Many people today, and we can be just as guilty of it. We really are just as guilty of it. We hide from God mostly by just shifting the standard of what's right and wrong. There are no absolutes in our culture anymore, except for this one, and you heard it in that video. We claim that you can never judge. We take that Bible passage about judging completely out of context. And we say that the only absolute is that you can't tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, because we get to decide what is right and what is wrong. But if we can convince ourselves that everything is okay, we convince ourselves that there is no way that God can be anything but pleased with us. After all, there's always somebody worse than us that we can use as a person that we justify ourselves against. And when that happens, it becomes very, very hard to see any need for a Savior to rescue us from our sin and from death. We tend to try and purify ourselves and put on masks and hide, but do you see what happens when you do that? You actually become more impure. Kind of ironic, isn't it? The quest to make ourselves more pure actually leads to more impurity, because what happens is we become guilty of the sin of self-righteousness. That's what happens when we determine the standard of what's right and God doesn't. When we say we're holy and God doesn't. Just like we learned when Adam and Eve were first tempted by Satan in the garden, it is awfully tempting for us to put ourselves in the place of God. But when we do, we not only bring a curse to our relationship with Him, it affects every relationship we have here on earth. Now, I'm going to grant this fact, that by the world's standards, most everyone in here, maybe everyone in here today, is a good person. But we are not here. And this church does not exist because of the world's standard. We are here this morning, and I pray that you get